honored and thrilled to have Collier McLaughlin join us this evening. Just want to give a few introductory remarks before we get underway. And I'm just going to switch the screen real fast. Just for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Episcopal Church Foundation, would love to just give you a quick overview. The Episcopal Church Foundation is a lay-led and run organization. Its mission and service is to strengthen the leadership, financial, and strategic capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and related organizations, such as camps and conference centers, charities, and other Episcopal groups. We do this through a variety of programs, such as ECF Model Practices, which I work on personally, and invite you to check out ecfvp.org for vestry papers and other great resources. A Fellowship Partners Program, vital teams for strengthening clergy and lay partnerships in congregations. We have an array of financial services with endowment management services, capital campaigns and planned giving, and strategic solutions as well. I encourage you to check out the web links on the left-hand side of your screen after this webinar to learn more. Just a few technical notes as we get underway this evening, especially for those of you who are just joining us. Everyone is on mute right now to cut down on audio feedback. We invite you to use the chat box on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Everyone there is introducing themselves. If you haven't done so, please go ahead and do that. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from and the name of your congregation. If you'd like to join us on the webcam, we've had a couple of folks do that. Hopefully we can get a few more folks to do that as well. It'd be great, especially in this discussion-based webinar this evening. To do that, you can do that by pressing the webcam icon on the upper left-hand side of your screen, and then press Start Sharing. As I pointed out as well, the chat box is in the lower right side of the screen. There's actually no slides for the presentation this evening. This is a discussion-based webinar, so I apologize. The PDF of the slides are actually not downloadable because there are none. But also wanted to note that this webinar is being recorded. We tried to make all of our webinars available for people to be able to access and use at a later time. Those are archived on ECF Model Practices, so please just bear that in mind if you have any particularly sensitive issues or questions that you would want to discuss. We will share contact information later if there is something that you do want to talk about but perhaps don't want to do so on this public forum. Kay is going to introduce herself, but I just briefly share that in my brief time of being able to get to know Kay in preparation for this webinar, I can just tell you the energy and passion and knowledge that she brings to, particularly to small church ministry, is just tremendous. And I am just so delighted that she is going to be taking us through this next 60 or so minutes to discuss the topic of small churches, an issue that is, not issue, but particularly a ministry that is very near and dear to my heart as well, having come out of parish ministry from a small congregation, and as we know, is an integral part of what makes our Episcopal Church. So without further ado, I will hand this over to Kay, and again, welcome to everyone. Please take advantage of the chat box here and her having Kay as our resource this evening.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see so many of you from so many different places. I think that's truly representative of what we know about our church and its small churches. I'd like us to begin with just these thoughts from Julian of Norwich. So let us pray. Dear Lord, as we begin, let us hold these words in mind. In this he showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, lying in the palm of my hand. And to my understanding, it was as round as any ball. I looked thereupon and thought, what may this be? And I was answered in a general way thus, it is all that is made. I marveled how it could last, for we thought it might fall suddenly to naught for littleness. And I was answered in my understanding, it lasts and ever shall last, because God loves it, and so hath all things its being through the love of God. Amen. I grew up in a small church until I was 15 years old, at which point I moved to Lexington and began to experience some program and resource-sized parishes. I have worked for the Diocese of Lexington for over 30 years, doing communications and leadership and various other things, but it's been in my role as transition minister that I have learned so much from the small churches in our diocese and across the country. My first experience, the very first visit I was called upon to make as a transition officer, was to one of our smallest parishes in the mountains. And I sat down with all my information, all of the resources I was taking with me, and listened, looked at the budget that was presented to me and thought, oh dear, this doesn't fit anything that I learned in my training as a transition officer. So I listened some more and I asked some questions. And then I ran home, and I see that my good friend and colleague, Brian Kibler, our archdeacon, on the camera. Brian has probably served more small churches than most clergy combined in my way of understanding. And I came to Brian and said, Brian, I need help. What's going on? And so I began learning from his experience in the small churches some of the things that I would have had no way of knowing. And I had no way of knowing that I was going to be introduced to the greatest course in faithfulness of my entire life. The original working title for my book was Lessons in Faithfulness from the Kingdom Come Parkway. The Kingdom Come Parkway is a road in eastern Kentucky. It takes you from Pineville to Harlan. Some of you have heard of Harlan from things like the TV show Justified. Driving that highway through the cut-throughs in the mountains, I came to realize and really experience the isolation that some of our small parishes have. Some of it is physical isolation, as experienced in eastern Kentucky. Some of it is isolation from being cut off in a city, a part of a city that no longer has the neighborhoods it used to have. But that highway for me just really represented so much about our smaller churches. When we look at what we're going to talk about tonight, and we think about mission and focus, I think the main thing that I want to do is engage us in thinking about the reality of our church, because I believe we've been fooled into thinking that small churches are an aberration when they are, in fact, our norm. And if we really think about it, 80% of Episcopal churches have an average Sunday attendance of less than 151. And some have average Sunday attendance of 4 or 7 or 11. And yet we hear conversations among the people that make decisions about closing the doors of churches that have fewer than 200 people. I don't think it's simply our denomination that has been fooled into this kind of thinking. I think we have come to believe that the mega churches are the future. And truly, while the mega churches have a huge percentage of the population, all we have to do is drive down any highway, not an interstate, get off on a state road and drive, as my husband and I did recently. And I started counting the number of churches without ever getting off of a main highway, just on a county road. And in every 25-mile stretch, there were at least 12 small church buildings of many denominations. And I began to wonder, who really is looking at this? Is anybody getting off of the interstates and looking at what's out there? Is anybody visiting our diocese to see? So the first thing that I believe that I discovered in doing this work of transitions is that our norm, what is most normal in our church and in most of Protestantism, is the family or pastoral size congregation. And yet, when I was researching my book and I started looking for resources, I could not find anything after 1988 written from a positive perspective. Everything that came after that was written as though the smaller or normal-sized church was a problem to be fixed. And so my first thought about our conversation this evening is about education and attitude, because I believe we have a huge educational job to do, and to really help people understand that the heart and soul of our church is in these normal-sized congregations. As I interviewed people all across the country who work with small churches or both bishops, clergy, I really learned a lot. Let me talk about a couple of them, and then I want to get some feedback from you all in terms of questions before we go on. But a couple of really important things that I heard. One was that the way we are set up in terms of our seminary education is looking at a corporate growth model that says that the goal of every congregation is to become a program or resource-sized parish, not a valuing of the pastoral size or the family size congregation as an entity that is whole as it is, that is good. Now, we all know that there are issues, certainly, but we'll come back and talk about that. One person said to me, our seminaries are preparing people to sing cathedral-style evensong in tiny congregations that may not have an organ or a professional musician. They are also preparing them to have the kind of cutting-edge thinking that the community in which our churches are located is not ready for, is not relevant to what is happening in that community. I also heard from many, many people that felt called to ministry in the normal or small-sized church, that there was no thought that that was a valid calling. One former Presbyterian said, well, in my original denomination, they called it steeplechasing. But the idea being that you can accept a call to a small congregation at the beginning of your career, so to speak, but that you certainly are going to move forward through the sizes of congregations. And one of the reasons for that has to do with the way the pension fund is set up, which rewards the top 5 years of compensation. So both attitudinally and in the way we are set up to do business, to train clergy, we seem to have been set up for this corporate growth model and not to value the small churches. I'm going to pause for a minute and see if you have any response or any directions you would like to go with that, any thoughts to offer. Hello.
So for those of you who which may have joined a little bit late, you can use the chat box on the lower right-hand side of your screen to put any questions or comments. If you would like to verbally do that. We can also try opening back up the audio and trying to do that, hopefully, ideally via the phone, which will be a bit easier to cut down on the back issues. But looks like we got first question from Nancy, saying my church is 15 to 20 people, and we are terrible singers. How can I help improve our music?
Great question. We'll come back to that. See what else is on your mind. Music is one. What else?
Yeah. I got a bunch of other folks typing in, so we'll wait a little bit for folks to type in their questions.
Anything else, or would we like to forge on a little bit and come back? We'll come back to the music question. Oh, I see that. Any chance you can give this presentation to the House Bishop? I love that. Well, we can work on that. How to share collaborative leadership with a part-time bivocational. Okay. And working together. Okay. All right. Thank you. We will come back to some of those. I want to go on with a little bit more in terms of, let's see. Okay. The dollar thing. Okay. One of the things I want to be sure I mention to you all is that when I couldn't find resources that were current, I, of course, went online. And the first thing that I discovered was a book called The Grasshopper Myth. I loved what it said because the line that captivated me was, a rose will never be a redwood, and a pea will never be a pumpkin, no matter how much growth theory we feed it. Well, that just, it intrigued me. So I went on the website, and the website is called New Small Church. New Small Church. Carl Vaders, the author of this book, wrote it because he said it was a book he needed, and he couldn't find it. So he finally wrote it himself, paid for the printing, and thought that he maybe would get 500 copies, and was sure some of them would end up in his garage. It is now, he got 1,500 copies. It is now in its fourth printing because so many people need this book. I heartily recommend this to you. And I want to do all I can to try to get this to our bishops and other people that need to hear it. The subtitle is Big Churches, Small Churches, and the Small Thinking That Divides Us. It's a really, really powerful book. And I think that this attitudinal thing is one of the things that we have got to speak up about, really confront. Let me share this one thing that he talks about, that spiritual growth, that he keeps saying, my church is growing. Numerically, it has not increased in size, but it is increasing in spiritual growth and how we are touching and making a difference in people's lives, both within the church and within the community. I doubt that many people are aware of some of the good work that is happening in our small churches, very small numbers of people, not only within the church itself, but within their community. One of the things that so struck me was the fact that the doors would not be open with most of these churches without the deep commitment and I mean deep commitment, and you know this, of the laity to keeping those doors open, whatever that takes in terms of upkeep of the property, in terms of setting up of reading morning prayer when there is not a person to have the Eucharist, the sheer commitment and faithfulness. I was talking with a curate in one of our congregations who came out of a small church, and he said the thing he had realized in being a curate in a larger church was that the majority of people in the larger church have no idea what happens behind the doors of the sanctuary. And that if it were left to them to keep those doors open, that it probably would happen. So the difference in a consumer mentality and this high degree of commitment and faithfulness. Now you all have named some of the issues that plague our churches. And obviously one of them has a big dollar sign. And we do struggle with how to keep the doors open, how to survive. And there are some hard questions that often have to be answered. Several bishops that I talked to that have numerous small churches in their diocese were very cognizant of this whole experience, mainly because they started in small churches themselves. Now, we also have a number of people who have never either worshiped in a small church or served in a small church, that perhaps they came out of seminary, went as a curate to a place, and then went on to another program or resource-sized parish, and then perhaps to be a dean or a bishop. And so the small church experience is something new to them. But the bishops who I spoke with who are totally invested in this are grieving tremendously when there are places that no longer, not only because the church cannot come up with the money, but because the infrastructure of the community itself is such that people are leaving, and that vital, very vital services are no longer there. I live an hour from the diocesan office and drive in every day. I drive through a small community which was once thriving. It did not have an Episcopal church, but it had, I think, 5 other denominations. It had a military school. It had a public school, and all the usual things, the services that a city provides. And I have watched this little town, first the military school closed, and they've tried several other kinds of entities running that property. The elementary school has closed. The post office is probably going to be next. And I just watched this little community with everything going away. And so one of the things that bishops have talked about is that we have got to learn more about how to involve our congregations when decisions have to be made about working together. And there's some very creative things happening along that line. The Diocese of Maine, I tell some stories about that in my book. It's an excellent example of some ways of coming together. But the bishops that are really familiar with this are aware that the process of involving the small congregations in their future, when it looks like that, their viability as an individual congregation just really is questionable. One of the persons that I interviewed, who's been both a seminary professor and does a lot of interim work in a diocese, was very bothered by the fact that in far too many places, someone from the diocesan office arrives with the message that this church is closing. And there really isn't an involvement of the congregation in that process. So we have a long way to go. Part of our education is about process and about speaking up. One of the things we found here in Lexington, we've had two efforts to bring small churches together, not worshiping together, but bringing their resources together. One was the Small Church Ministry Consortium, and we keep trying to have various configurations of providing coverage for family-sized parishes. Brian has served so many of those, and now is in two of those congregations. And then we have the Network for Pastoral Leadership, which is the more pastoral-sized parishes. But one of the things that we have learned is when we can bring them together in network, that one of the things that happens is that they feel their strength, and they suddenly have more people elected to diocesan leadership positions, and so they get more voice in what is going on locally. So interacting with our congregations in a way that they come to know each other, even if they aren't, collaborating in worship on a regular basis, but that they are sharing ideas. They understand that they're not the only ones. When I go into a congregation, I tell them that they cannot have the title of red-haired stepchild because it's already been taken by at least every other congregation of that size. And it's true. A lot of our small congregations feel like they are the red-headed stepchild, and that certainly everybody else is getting a different kind of treatment. So as we can bring them together to talk with each other and know each other in some configuration, as I say, we have tried several for the family-sized parishes, and we still don't have the answer we would like. But it's an effort that is paying off in getting them to know each other and having representation on diocesan decision-making bodies. And that makes a huge difference, so that it is not only the program and resource-sized parishes that are in the decision-making positions, just a huge difference. And I suspect in most of our dioceses, we have, several dioceses have told me of having many more pastoral and family-sized congregations than they do resource parishes. You may be aware that only 30% of Episcopal clergy are full-time. And that is a startling number to think only 30%. So we're going to have to think differently. One of the things that I believe, and I borrowed this title from a man named Tom Chappell, who had a business called Tom's of Maine that did natural products, toothpaste, started with toothpaste. At any rate, Tom was a big Episcopalian, and his book was called Managing Upside Down. And it sounds very simple, because what he was saying is we have got to find out what people really want and need and where they really are before we offer them something. And I think that's one of the most disturbing things, is that we are not looking at the reality of where our churches are, what size they are and what they need, much less learning from them. And what I became so excited about is learning from them. I have learned more from these small churches, not only about faithfulness, but about the fact that our resources in the Episcopal Church are basically planned for program and resource-sized parishes. And so when they get to the smaller congregation, the normal-sized congregation, what are they to do? Let me give you an example. Over and over, you hear people say, well, everybody just has to learn to do stewardship the right way. And along come the formulas and the programs for doing stewardship. And very great concern when a smaller church does not follow it. My question is, what if the pattern of giving, of very faithful giving, is something that is a discipline, a spiritual discipline that has worked and is working? For instance, in some of our small parishes, some of the patterns began years ago when it was a rural setting and a lot of the finance was involved with the crops, the growing season. And some of those patterns still linger. I will hear a priest say to me, you know, these are the most generous people I have ever known. If something is needed, it is provided. Now, we can talk all day long about, well, people shouldn't have to give to a thing. They need to know that they're giving because they're called to give. You know, we all know that stewardship talk. But what if a major part of the discipline is recognizing the need and reaching deep to respond to that need, whether it's cutting the grass or repairing an air conditioner or providing the continuing education money or the automobile allowance for a clergy person. What if that is as valid an approach to stewardship as the Alabama plan or any plan that we've ever heard out there? I think there's a possibility that we're missing the boat, that we have something to learn from these parishes. What about the way, you know, talk to a larger church and they're all worried about, okay, we get all these people coming for our wonderful programs, how do we incorporate them and keep them? Last year at our executive council retreat, we did an exercise where we asked people how did they get there? And about 2/3 of them were from small churches, and each one of them said, when you get to a small church, you are invested in leadership very quickly because you are needed. So the incorporation comes through the development of leadership. So what if that is just as valid? What if that is an important lesson for us to learn? In some of our larger churches, we have to, you know, make our way through the ranks and find our way because certain families have been there, certain people have been in leadership for a long time. In the smaller congregations, everybody is needed, and we quickly engage people in leadership. Do we burn out? We burn out in all sorts of churches, obviously. But I think that we have failed to realize that what these churches have done out of necessity, now many of our churches are having to learn how to do with less. Because in a stronger economy, people had more resources. Now we have more and more parishes saying, well, wait a minute, we're having to cut back here, we're having to cut back there. Oh my goodness, our altar linens don't match. Oh my goodness, this doesn't look quite right. Our smaller churches have long since known how to make do. And they make this church is a huge part of their everyday. Keeping those doors open and keeping the services going makes a big difference. Now, let's stop for a minute and think about our cultural context as well, because we are in a post-Christian period. And I was at a conference called Reimagining Faith that is put on by one of our Baptist colleges. And we had people like Walter Brueggemann and Rudolph Volk and a couple of seminary presidents, one from a large Baptist seminary, and she made the statement, anyone who is sending someone to seminary today with the idea that they will make a full-time living in the church is not being honest. That is a great big statement. And I think that one of the things we have to do is step back and realize that the bivocational priesthood and alternative ways of, having clergy coverage and leadership is going to change. It is already changing. As I was talking with various dioceses, I learned about many, many programs where people are trying, they're not like the old Canon 9, and yet they are borrowing from the old Canon 9, the raising up the indigenous clergy from the congregations, and realizing that we are going to have to do more of that the bivocational or tent maker ministry is truly going to be a part of our lives. And I don't know a diocese that is not struggling with how to change that thinking. Our seminaries, many have gone to online. So alternative forms of training, not to have less training among our clergy, but to try to be able to cover our congregations and provide them leadership, provide the Eucharist. Some are raising up sacramentalists who are trained simply to be sacramentalists for a certain period of years, and then they rotate off. Seminaries like Sewanee and CDSP are providing programs for people to have an alternative form of training because the 3-year residential seminary experience may not be what we're able to do anymore. So all of this says that while we are facing some very real issues, and we're going to talk about those, that we're in a different time, and we keep treading water trying to act as though we are in the old church that no longer exists. And the small congregations who have been living with some of the realities of limited resources for many years have a great deal to teach us, I believe. There are lots of stories in our book. By the way, the name of the book, let me see if I can get up here. Big Lessons from Little Places. Faithfulness and the Future in Small Congregations. It's just out. And here's the grasshopper myth by Carl Vaders. And be sure to check out that website, New Small Church, all lowercase, New Small Church. He has an e-newsletter. I think you will be fascinated. One of the older books that I borrowed from Brian Kibler that I really think is still very relevant is Lyle Shaller's The Small Church is Different. And a really good handle on the way, many of the ways that the small church is different that are still relevant today. All right, let's talk about some of these specifics. And the worshiping and mission together, I think, is one of the waves of the future, and we do have some good models of how that is happening. I would point you to the Diocese of Maine in particular, that and the careful way they have gone about this. They embark upon conversations with the congregations in terms of helping them look at the realities of their life and the possibilities of coming together. And they do not try for there to be any one plan. I think that's another thing, that they had so many different examples. For instance, there was one where a priest was an assistant with actually living in a rectory in a suburb, but serving another small congregation. And so balancing those two jobs and getting housing and able to do some things in the city that they had not been able to accomplish before, and really bringing new vitality to the other small congregation. The other thing that I think we often don't realize, and I'm not sure how many of you all are in city small churches and how many of you are in more rural or isolated small congregations, but I talk to so many people who are in churches, maybe their buildings are not small, and that's one of the issues that one of you mentioned, a building sort of eating up what resources you do have. But neighborhoods that have changed so much that there's no parking, young families have moved out, and so a lot of congregations that have had to look toward what is our mission now. One talked about that there is a nursing home near them, an assisted living facility, and that they realized that part of their mission is about hospice care and dealing with the issues of senior adults. And that's their internal mission. And then they have opened their church to arts groups, music groups, poetry readings, but they have offered the building as a place for various venues for various arts groups to perform on a weekly basis. And now, one of the things that Carl Vaders talks about, and I think he's just right on target, is when we do these kinds of things, the purpose of it is not to have more butts in the pew, to get more bucks in the plate. That the purpose of it is reaching souls and connecting them with Jesus, changing lives. And, you know, again, as transition officer, and some of you have probably been in that capacity, I always hear, okay, bring us a priest that is going to bring more people so we have more money. And we've kind of gotten the cart before the horse. You know, what are we called to do in that neighborhood and that community? As one bishop said to me, there are some communities where our call is to help a community in hospice care because they are nearing the end. And how do you do that? What do we know about the way to when it is time for something to be done? That is a valid call. Then we have congregations of a handful of people that are doing some of the most exciting work that you can possibly imagine. I talked to a group in Kansas that with just a handful of people, their mission became feeding in the small college the athletes who were there over the holidays. They had no cafeteria service in the dorm, and somebody had said to the coach, that Episcopal church likes to feed people. And the most amazing stories of how the basketball coach told the baseball coach, and suddenly they had this amazing ministry. And it was just a handful of people. But that's what they've become known in the community for. And those athletes are working with them and visiting shut-ins. Amazing things have been happening. So collaboration, somebody asked about collaboration. Collaboration is can be as creative and innovative as you want it to be. Our network group today had a webinar, and the subject was entrepreneurial leadership. And they're all in small parishes, normal-sized parishes. And one of the things that we talked about was that if you look at the dictionary definition for entrepreneurial, It is people who are innovative and risk takers, and they take initiative. And, you know, we can get very weary feeling like that we are the church that somebody is going to close the doors. And one of the things Bryant told me early on, and this was verified by every bishop and every priest I talked to, is that most of our small congregations live in fear that someone is going to close their doors and take their money. And whatever they have, that it is going to be gone. And that they are trying to protect the church. One seminary professor, now retired and doing a lot of work in small churches, said to me, we have got to reestablish trust between the diocese, the diocesan leadership from the bishop through all the decision makers. And this is why what I was saying to you about building networks where we get people in decision-making positions so that they're part of the decision-making, not feeling that they simply are having decisions foisted upon them without the real experience of the small church being named by someone who understands it. And that is just so, and his point was that there's a lack of trust built out of this fear. Some of it is without reason. Some of it has reason. They've seen this happen. Bishop after bishop said to me, no one wants to close a church. You know, it's the last thing that any of us want to do. But I think that the sharing of experience and information in the actual places where it can make a difference is just crucial. So I cannot encourage you enough, wherever you are, to try to get together in some formal, informal way with others in small churches to get people elected to these bodies and have a voice. We must have a voice. Let's see. Let me pause a minute. See where you are now. All right. Someone says that we need to keep God the center of what and why we do. And absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the point that Carl Vaders makes over and over again, that people are missing, that the small church is doing some of the most important relational work in terms of having a true place of relationship with each other, caring for each other, support for the community, and of spiritual growth, of deepening their spiritual lives. And, you know, we can't say that about, and I don't want to generalize. Again, as Carl Vaders says, I don't dislike big churches, nor do I. There's some great things about big churches. But one of the things that we seem to be missing is the realization that every church was not intended to be a program size or a resource size church. And so this business of church growth theory, you know, sometimes the community will not sustain that kind of growth. It's just not possible within whatever's going on in that community. And we know that there is a need for the kind of things that small churches do. If you look at a mega church, how is it really working? It has a lot of different cells and small groups. We have that in small churches already. That's who we are. We're relational. When someone is preaching, I can guarantee that every one of you know some of what is going on in the lives of your people. And so preaching is a very personal experience. Okay, where are you? Okay, it is that center that has moved the two churches that I serve from yoked to shared ministry. That sounds fabulous. Can you say more about that, Susan? Waiting to see if Susan's going to type us something else there to tell us a little bit more about that. I'm guessing, and this is a guess, so I'll wait for her to answer, but often when we yoke parishes, somebody out here decides who's going to be yoked, and then you hope it works. And sharing ministry is something that I believe feels more organic. Let's see what we've got here. Nancy, yes. Wonderful thing that you mentioned here about the conflict is very apparent in the small church. One of the things that we have learned here, we've been doing a lot of leadership work and a lot of it based in family systems. And one of the things that we have found is that when you're trying to build the potential of leadership to get away from the squeaky wheel syndrome and try to really empower those who have the potential for leadership, it can happen faster in the small congregation. Let me give you an example. We were working in a small congregation in eastern Kentucky, and a lot of the same stuff was going on that you've experienced, I know, the rolling of eyes, the side conversations, and some anger at the diocese. And so we stopped what we were doing. And on the spur of the moment, we invited people to help us define the anxiety behaviors from Friedman's work. And after they defined them, we asked them these questions. Have you observed these behaviors in church? Oh, yeah. Have you ever gotten sucked into these behaviors in your church? Well, that was a different story, but in small groups they talked about that, talked about the impact that was not what they desired it to be, and then we came back together and talked about alternative behaviors. Behind me on the door, you probably can see it close up, but there is a large poster that talks about behaviors that assist in effective work in a church and those that take away from the effectiveness. And we have found that the small churches quickly get on to these concepts and put them into practice, where in the larger congregation, it takes much longer. So yes, while the potential for conflict is there, the ability to empower more people more quickly in an effective way is also there. Where we get in trouble is where we get bogged down with the squeaky wheel, and everybody is focusing on the squeaky wheel instead of empowering the potential for leadership. And there's a whole section about that in my leadership book, which is the book that came out before that, Becoming the Transformative Church, that describes that work. Somebody just said, don't forget Nancy's music question. Often small churches don't have resources like an organ or an organist or a trained music leader. And I've seen numerous ways of approaching that. We have a small parish that has got a group of folk musicians that work with them. And there's a guitar and a hammered dulcimer and a flute, and they have just done an exceptional job in that congregation. They've become a real singing congregation because of that. Another church has an old electronic organ that has a recording capacity, and they will grab almost anybody that comes along that can help record some of the service music. Because once the organist that was there was named Dora, the instrument has come to be called the Dora. And so Dora is still going strong. Some people have been working with the concept of paperless music. I don't know whether any of you all have heard of that, but working with how you work without formal hymnals. It's more of a responsive. I'm checking over here to see what's happening. All right. Are y'all reading? Okay, the Tizay chant is wonderful. Bell choirs. I have seen groups work with bell choirs. You know, the urging of the congregational singing and looking for what is, you know, what's available in the community. The church I was describing that used the folk musicians, they went the route of what's available in our community. We don't have anything in the parish itself, so we're going to look in the community and see what we can bring in to help us. And the thing that I like best about that is how the congregational singing has grown. They still do have a choir. I think in one of Brian's churches where he is now, sometimes he has more in the choir than in the congregation, and a very strong choir with a combination of kids and adults. But looking for how do we know what's available in the congregation and in the community. And a part of it, I think also, and I'm a musician, and I love good church music, but sometimes we have to let our desire for perfection or even excellence in terms of this is really good music, we have to let that go a little bit. And again, if we've got God at the center, and what we're trying to do is enrich our spiritual lives, how do we use music to do that? There are recordings. Some people can work well with those and find it works well, and others get frustrated by it because it's hard to get the tempos going. But my real encouragement to people is look in your congregation, look in your community, and also can we accept, you know, what singing results? You know, it's painful, especially if you have trained ears. It's very painful when a choir doesn't sound like a choir, or at least the choir you dream of and hope for. So I think this is another of our growing edges, is how do I look for and accept, you know, the resource that's going to be less than what I was trained to do. It's a hard one. Somebody here helped the congregation by finding YouTube videos. That's a great one. I love this one. Singing was not our gift, so let's not. And, you know, sometimes that's just real. That is just real. The other thing is knowing your community. It's very difficult to go in if you have an expectation of good Anglican music and the community itself is not geared that way. Even finding a pianist or a good piano tuner can be a challenge. So adjusting some expectations, as well as looking at all these other All right, here we've got another one. Unfortunately, we have someone who plays the organ. Question. The joy is that regardless of how dirgy the music is appreciated because it is an offering. That's a great statement. And, you know, most of us have had experience of church musicians who are members of the parish and have been at the keyboard for a very, very long time. And again, it is a mindset. And if moving in the direction of developing a music program is something that if there are enough people to do and you are able to do it, then how to deal with that. There's also a story in my book about a parish that had to do just exactly that. And the slow process of transitioning from a person who really wanted to finish out their years serving the congregation, giving their gift in that way. So it is a both and thing.
Yeah, and thank you, Kay. Just want to be mindful of the time. An hour flies by very quickly, so out of respect for everyone, we'll just go ahead and kind of wrap up at this point. I know there's a lot of other questions, but we want to make sure we can keep the conversation going, as one person has also pointed out. Thank you, Kay, so much. This was just an absolutely wonderful, wonderful time and very inspirational for all. And contact information for ECF and ECF Auto Practice is on there. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see links to Kay's latest book. Click on that for more on that. An article, great article she wrote on vestry papers. Along with, they've also added the grasshopper myth and the small church is different for you there as well. I'll also make sure that's in an email will be sent to everyone registered tonight with a link to these resources. You'll also find in that email, but also if you go into your inbox right now, a link to a survey. Please just take a moment to give some feedback. This feedback will be shared with Kay and will also go for all of our webinars that we plan with ECF, and this is how we go about planning all of our webinar topics and how we go about being able to structure our webinars as well. So your feedback is greatly appreciated and valued, and I encourage you to please take a moment to do that. Again, Kay, thank you so much for your time this evening and sharing your knowledge. This was tremendous. Wish everyone a wonderful evening and Godspeed and blessings in your ministry.
Thank you all so much.